But if you're not familiar with the franchise, this is a game where you have a bunch of worms out on a map, and you're going to have a whole bunch of different weapons in your arsenal, and you can collect more throughout the game, and you're going to be shooting them at your opponents, trying to either get their health down to 0 or to knock them off the map, because that will also insta-kill them. But the feature of this game that really set it apart from a lot of other games is that the map was fully destructible, and as you were issuing attacks on your opponents, you could also destroy portions of the map, opening up different holes and craters where your enemies could fall into, or you could even do so much damage that you're even opening up new areas for players to completely fall off the map. Of course, the board game is going to be taking a lot of inspiration from this, and they do carry over a lot of these aspects really, really well. The way that this game gets set up is that you're going to be putting a starting tile out on the table. This essentially acts as a hole in the map where you could fall through, but it also has a dial on it that's going to be indicating the current wind direction. Just like in the video game, the wind direction can influence the trajectory of a lot of your weapons, but in the board game, it can also influence the trajectory of your worms when you're making big jumps across the map, or if you get thrown in an explosion. But after that starting tile has been placed out on the table, players are going to be building up the map by each player placing one landmass tile out on the table, so that's connected to that starting location, or another tile that another player placed. Each of the tiles is going to be in different shapes, and they're going to be made up of a number of hex spaces that players are going to be moving across when you actually get into playing the game. After each player has placed a tile, there's going to be a pool of items and worms that need to be distributed across those tiles depending on player count, and these are going to be put out in the exact same way, with players taking turns drafting an item from the pool and then putting it wherever they want on the tiles, but there is a limit that there can only be a maximum of 3 different objects on a single hex. Each worm will be assigned to a specific color depending on the team that they're a part of, but at this point in the game, no player knows which team is going to be theirs because that's going to be randomly assigned after the entire board is set up. So you're going to want to keep this in mind as you're placing out the different colored worms, and you're going to be trying to even out the playing field a little bit so that no particular group of worms has a competitive advantage. But as I said, there's a bunch of different items that players are going to be putting out on the board, so it's not just worms here. There's also going to be proximity mines that will potentially explode if a worm moves into the same hex. There's also explosive barrels that if you shoot them or they get caught in an explosion, they can explode and cause a crater as well as fire across the map. And of course, there will be loot crates making an appearance so that players can gain access to more and powerful weapons. These weapons are going to be represented by weapon cards, and each player is going to be starting with the same set of cards at the beginning of the game, except for one, because there's going to be one more card randomly dealt to each player, giving a little bit of variety each time you play. And of course, to win this game, you want to be the last team standing, and the way that you defeat your opponents, just like in the video game, is in one of 2 ways. You can either get their health down to 0, and to do that, you just have to hit a worm twice. The first time you hit a worm, they're going to be put down on their side, and once a worm is on their side, if you hit them again, they are defeated and eliminated from the game. The second way is exactly like in the video game. If a worm gets hit off the map, then they are also eliminated. But this is a turn-based game, so players are just going to be taking turns activating just one of their worms. Whenever you do that, you'll be able to stand that worm up if it was knocked down, which means that you're essentially healing yourself. But then you'll also be able to take 2 movement actions, and there's 2 options for movement. You could either just move over to an adjacent hex, or instead you can try to make a jump that will move you 2 hexes and also jump you over anything that is in between. This one does come with a bit more risk because you will have to roll a die to determine if you landed where you expected, or if you're pulled in the direction of the wind, or maybe somewhere else completely. But after you've completed your 2 movements, you'll then be able to play one of the cards from your hand, which are going to be offering you up all sorts of different weapons and gear. You might have a girder, a ninja rope, a jetpack, or a bazooka, or even something powerful like the holy hand grenade.
How does it work?
All the different weapons could have different effects and abilities when it comes to how they deform the map, how they push players, and even how they inflict their damage. And I already explained how damaging a worm works, but you can also damage each individual hex, and whenever you do that, you're going to be causing a crater on that hex. Once a hex gets 3 craters, it's going to be completely removed from the game, and you're going to be placing a water hex token on top of it, indicating that that area of the map has been completely blown away. Whenever that happens, not only are you making the map smaller and more dangerous, but anything that was located on that hex is instantly eliminated from the game. But this is Worms after all, and some of these weapons aren't going to be as easy to hit your target as you might hope, because each of these weapons is going to have some sort of accuracy rating, and the higher that value is, the better, because it indicates how many dice you get to roll when you fire that weapon, with each of the die indicating whether you hit your target, whether it got carried by the wind, or went somewhere else completely. And since you just get to pick which die you want to resolve, having more dice just means you have more options to choose from, increasing the odds that you'll roll the value that you want. You'll then resolve the attack according to the results of your roll, as well as any effects of the weapon, and of course this can fling worms all over the map, triggering chain events where one worm might get thrown into a landmine that could then cause more worms to get thrown around, and as unfair as that might seem sometimes, it's still a ton of fun to watch. Some of the weapons in the game can also allow you to take an additional movement after you've used it, or even use an additional weapon card, but if that's not the case, you're just going to be ending your turn. And when you do that, there's just one last thing you need to do, and that's to draw a card from the supply deck, which can have all sorts of different effects, like introducing new items to the board, changing the wind direction, or even eliminating fire. This usually involves some minor choices, deciding which tokens you want to add or remove, and giving you a few options of where you can place them on the board. The game continues like this until there's only one player's worms left on the board, and then that player would win the game. And if you want to learn more about this one, you can check out the campaign. I have it linked in the description below.